Let me. Hi, all. So glad you're here with us. I have a special guest that I told you about on my podcast last week that I'm super excited about. I have actually been taking her course and love it. And so I know that you will love it too. So her name is Ariel Finlinson, and she empowers women to feel fulfilled in their married sexual relationships. She's a mama of four, host of the Ladies Talking Love podcast, and she's a recent graduate of USU, which you guys know that's where I live, with a master's of human development and family studies degree. She's created and piloted a sexuality course for married women. Now, I've done some podcasts on sexual intimacy, and they have been really helpful. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback. So this is going to be awesome if you're interested in this subject. So Ariel, I think I'm just gonna, do you have anything you want to say before we get into questions?
I'm just so glad to be here. I'm excited. I love talking about sexuality and helping women feel empowered in their relationships. So yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, so she wants to talk about some of these ideas and traditions that we hold that basically keep us from living into our potential for joy and fulfillment in our sex lives. So let's talk about the first hard question. A lot of women talk about this idea that they don't have desire. I hear this all the time in my coaching calls, in my marriage calls. So what are some of the misconceptions we have about desire?
This is a huge one. And like you said, I think this is one of the biggest concerns that a lot of women bring to whatever, to therapy, to coaching calls, to friends. And they're just like, I don't have desire. So I hope I can break it down a little bit. We could spend, 2 hours talking
Right.
about desire, but let's just break it down just a little bit. I think the biggest thing is that most of us have a misconception about what desire actually is. And so we think of desire as something that just spontaneously falls on us. And this is kind of what we see in the media, in movies, and also what we may have felt if you waited to have sex until you were married or until you were farther along in the relationship. You may have felt some spontaneous desire because you are excited at something new. But then for a lot of women, after they get married, and especially after having kids, they may experience something called responsive desire. And so the issue here is we think that if we don't feel desire spontaneously, it doesn't just fall on us. We see our husband and we're like, ooh, let's have sex. Like we think we don't have desire. But that's a huge misconception because so the stats are actually that only about 15% of women experience spontaneous desire. And so if you don't feel desire just off the cuff randomly, you are so normal. And it doesn't mean that you don't have desire. It doesn't mean that you're broken. What it means is that you probably have responsive desire. And what this looks like is that something sexy, something that brings up your arousal has to happen before you feel desire. And so I'm going to use my hands if you're on the
Mhm.
podcast, just imagine with me. But a lot of us here, we're at the base level. So say we're at ground floor, right? And if you have spontaneous desire, it doesn't take much to bump you up to your desire threshold. But if you have responsive desire, this might take some effort. This might take some fun text. This might take some connection. You're slowly moving up, and maybe your desire threshold is up here. It might take some time alone after being with the kids all day. It might take some snuggling. It might take your spouse and you to, get the house clean. It
Mhm.
might take some kissing and touch. And after you're already engaging in more intimate activities that bring up your arousal, that's where you're going to hit your desire threshold. And so I think a huge thing I want women to realize is you don't have to feel desire first to choose to engage in a sexual encounter. And just because you don't feel desire now doesn't mean that you can't get there.
Oh, I absolutely love this. And it makes me feel a sense of relief that if it's waned a bit, there's nothing wrong with us.
No.
It's not that we don't love each other as much anymore, or I think a lot of things run through your head when you feel like I just am not feeling it, you know?
Yes. And
Maybe I
especially if
did.
you felt it before, it's like,
Yes.
what happened to me? Where did my desire go?
Exactly. Okay, so tell me what are some of the helpful ways? Because I talk tons about how our thoughts and our perceptions create things in our lives. They create our feelings and our actions and what we experience. So what are some helpful ways you have found to rewrite this narrative, which is thinking different thoughts around desire in your marriage?
Yes. Shari, I'm realizing I'm in my kids' room and I left their white noise on. I don't know if you can hear
Oh,
it.
no, no,
I'm
it's
gonna
good.
okay.
You
I was
can
like,
turn it off. Do you want to turn it off?
yeah, do you edit it? I was like, sorry.
No, I don't edit, so we're just gonna go with it.
Okay, perfect.
We
I'm just turning it off.
I don't have a team and all, so my audience knows that they're gonna get this stuff. I'm like, you know what?
So
You're gonna hear
sorry.
piano in the
I
background
was
because
finding a quiet room in the house and I realized I left the white noise on. Okay, that's
it's
embarrassing.
perfectly fine. I haven't heard it. I don't think they will.
Okay,
So
good.
just to
Okay,
help you feel better.
so rewriting what's helped me kind of
Yes.
rewrite this.
Yes.
So I think a huge part for me has been realizing that just because I don't feel desire spontaneously doesn't mean that I don't have it. So one of the major goals of what I do is I want to help women learn to love sex with their husband. I want this to be an empowering and fulfilling relationship. And there's so many things that go into that. But when we think about it with desire, a lot of women are like, I want sex. But here's the thing, if you aren't having good sex and you don't enjoy sex, there's going to be no way that you're going to feel more desire. And so, first, we have to kind of fix that to make sex good. And if you can get there, then I think it can be pretty easy to move your desire up because you're like, okay, I don't necessarily desire sex right now, but I know I love it and I know it's connecting. And so I'm willing to get there. And when you know sex is good and you enjoy it, it's so much easier to make that choice to get there. And so that's part of the thing that's helpful too is you get to start kind of doing an experiment. Let's go back to like, grade school science. You
Hmm.
get to start trying some things out to figure out, okay, where is my arousal threshold and where's my desire threshold? So, what's going to start getting me in the mood emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually? Like all of these aspects in your relationship are really important to get me into that threshold of starting to feel aroused and then finding with whatever arousal I reach, maybe we're in the middle of a sexual encounter and that's when I finally feel I actually desire sex. And so it
Hmm.
can take a little while, but when you're open to it and you know it's good, you can enjoy the process. And so part of it is going to be experimenting. Like, what do I need mentally to be able
Hmm.
to focus on this? What do I need emotionally? Wow, I haven't connected with my husband in a week. There's no way I want to be intimate if I
Hmm.
feel like I don't know you, because then you just feel used
Right.
if you
Right.
haven't connected. So, like, what do you need to do? Do you need to
Hmm.
sit on the couch and talk about your week? And so, just kind of experimenting. But I think the biggest thing is to recognize that it's okay to not feel desire first and then to make sex a good part of your relationship so that it's easy to say, yeah, I'm not there yet, but I'm open to it. Let's see if we can get me there.
Hmm. I love that. I think one thing that's helped me a ton emotionally to be ready is to plan it. I know that sounds
Yes.
boring, but like in
No,
the
it's
moment, being
so
like,
true.
I'm working up to this all day today, like that is a huge help to me. Just know it's coming instead of like thrown on me.
Yeah.
That's been helpful for me. What have you found that's been helpful for you? Like an actual thing you can do to
This
help you.
may sound kind of silly,
Hmm.
but I am such a sucker for like romance books. I love
Uh-huh.
clean romance books, but
Right.
just
Me
like
too.
that little storyline of
Hmm.
a guy and falling in love, it helps me remember why I love my husband. And that
Hmm.
helps bring up my desire to want to connect sexually with him. And so those can be helpful watching a little chick flick and just like thinking about why I love him, thinking about the
Hmm.
things that he provides for our family and gives to me and then of course like there's a preacher, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he talks about this idea that when we undress emotionally, then we want to undress physically. And I think that's
That's
huge. Like
interesting.
when
Yeah.
we can connect in
Mm-hmm.
a vulnerable way, and a lot of people are really scared of vulnerability. They're
Right.
like, I don't want to show my spouse the bad
Right.
side of me or the hard side of
Right.
me or the side where I messed up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a price. And if
Yeah.
you're willing to pay the price to be vulnerable, that's what's going to make the emotional connection in sex really powerful. And so that's a huge part that helps me also want to connect sexually, is to see that my husband loves me despite the things I do wrong and I
Mm-hmm.
mess up and I'm not a perfect person, and he loves me despite that, and also is there to help me improve, and we're there for each other. And so being able to be really open and vulnerable about things I'm ashamed about and embarrassed about can be a really good way to open the door to feeling safe and wanting to connect sexually as well.
Wow, you have hit on the most important things I found, truly. In fact, when my husband and I call it a vacation when we go just together alone, and I call it a trip when it's with the kids.
Yes.
I'm like, when we go on vacation, that I usually have self-help books and all these, I'm always concentrating on like the things that I'm working on in my career and my family and all the things. But when I go on those trips that are vacations with my husband and I always take those books because I'm like, they will help me with, you said, like that arousal and then the desire. And I have this lady at the library where I live, and I'm like, I need some more books, some really good ones. And she knows me now because I'm like, it's that time. I'm going on vacation. I want some
We're
good
going on a
books.
vacation.
Yes. And she's
And
like,
it
oh
is
my
such
God. Yes.
it's
She's like,
such
I've
an
got some
interesting
for you,
thing, right? Because
Mhm.
we want safety in our relationship. And that is a really important thing. If you feel unsafe, you're not
Mhm.
going to want to connect sexually. But
Right.
the vulnerability brings an
Right.
aspect of unknown and a
Right.
little bit of unsafe because you
Mhm.
could be rejected, but that's where desire comes in, because
Right.
desire is curiosity. That's actually
Mhm.
what Emily Nagoski talks about. Like desire is curiosity. And so if we don't bring in things we can be curious about and that are new, it can be hard to feel that desire.
Yes, I love this. Okay, so tell me, what are some harmful stereo gender types about men that limit women's sexual potential?
There are so many.
There are
and
so many.
and it's so sad to me because it's not only harmful to women, but it's really harmful to men. We
It is.
demean men and we make
Right.
them seem like animals.
Right.
And we
Yep.
don't realize the harm. Like I grew up in a religious community and a very religious family, and especially like the way modesty was talked about. It was this idea, right, that if I dressed in a way that showed my body, I could make men have unclean thoughts. I could make them sin. And so automatically that put the pressure on me that
Mhm.
men can't control themselves. And so it's
Right.
up to me to control them. And so it puts this light on men as almost
Mhm.
being animals and
Mhm.
uncontrollable with their sexual desire. And this is so hurtful in a marriage and in any type of relationship, because women then feel this pressure that it's their job to keep their husband fulfilled sexually, because if they don't, I mean, we're going to the extreme here, but if they don't, there's this fear he's going to cheat on them or he's going
Right.
to look at pornography. And that is the most unsexy reason to have sex. Like, if you want to feel
Yeah.
desire, that's not going to bring it up. And so, being able to recognize like sex is not a biological need. And we often, as women, we're raised, to look outward, to take care of others. And so sometimes we come into marriage thinking it's my job to take care of this need. If you're on the podcast,
Mhm.
I'm doing huge quotes because sex is
Right.
not a need. And I want to
Mhm.
clarify, like, I do believe that sex is like a relational need for a healthy, thriving relationship.
Right.
If
Right.
sex is not a part of a marriage, I don't think that they can have the deep connection that you could have and thrive as much as you could, but it is not a biological need.
Right.
Men
I
can
loved
control
when I
themselves.
heard that in your program, you said that, and I had never even thought of that ever. And I loved, yeah, explain more about that. I think it's such a mind blowing concept.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I mean, we're gonna go a little extreme here again, but it
Uh-huh.
feeds into rape culture, right? Like if
Right.
we believe men can't control themselves and that it's up to women, it almost says that it's not a man's fault. And that's going to the
Mhm.
extreme.
Right.
But because of this idea, because of modesty culture, a lot of us may think of men as kind of like the aggressors, the one who are
Mhm.
going to chase us because they're
Mhm.
driven by sex, right?
Right. Right.
And it paints this relationship that sex is almost like an it's separate from the rest of our relationship. It makes it seem like it's this animalistic part that is
Mhm.
just to feed this animal of our
Mhm.
husband
Mhm.
instead of being a whole connected part. And so I know for the first part of my marriage, it felt like we could try to be connected, but sex was more about if I was attractive, if my body was attractive to my
Right.
husband, versus being able to see sex as I do now as a way for my husband to accept and love all of me. My stretch marks and my,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
baby belly and the work I do for our family and the energy I bring to our marriage and same for him instead of just kind of viewing it as I think we've all heard it, right? Like all men want is sex. All you have to
Right.
do is have sex with your husband to keep him happy.
Right.
And these myths are so shallow and make sex you're not able to really receive the deep joy and fulfillment from sex because we've watered it down to this biological need and about just how bodies look versus connecting our souls.
I absolutely love this conversation. And I have had, I swear, every single one of the things that you have talked about. I have thought it
Yeah.
and I have remembered like periods in my life. I don't anymore, but I remember periods in my life being like, I'm only here for sex. Like
Yeah.
that's the main reason for
Yes.
his eyes, why I'm here. And I
Yeah.
know that's not how he felt, but I felt that way. And
Yeah.
I think it's because of all these misconceptions that affect the way we show up in our sex lives. Oh my word. Sorry.
No, you're
Just
right.
once
And it's
again.
so crazy then too because we if we're going back to like dating or even in marriage, sometimes we don't
Mhm.
recognize that it's actually an unhealthy relationship because we've been raised to think that men just want sex. And so if there
Right.
is a man who just wants sex and is there just for sex, we don't recognize that that's unhealthy. And now I do want to say I think most men are good and that's
Right.
not how they function, but there are men out there who also believe these myths because they've been steeped in them. And so you
Right.
might find in your marriage that your husband is like, "Oh, I don't need sex," like, and they're good, but
Right.
we've all been kind of steeped in these belief systems, and so being able to take it back and look and say, "What do we actually want sex to be like for our marriage, and how do we want that to look? What do we want it to feel like, how do we want it to be empowering and to be able to shift that definition for both of you because there might be some work on both of your sides but I think most good men if they're pressuring you to have sex or forcing you
Mhm.
like that is
Mhm.
unhealthy and let's just
Right.
put that out there.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So tell me about motherhood and what you think about mothers and women and how how do you feel that affects how you show up in your sexual relationship? Because I have five, you have four. It's a big, it's a big thing.
Yes. Oh, it's huge. I'll share a quick story. I remember when I was pregnant with my second, my husband was leaving for a wedding or something of a family member, and I was going to be home alone for the weekend because I was too close to giving birth to go, but not close enough that we were actually worried I was going to give birth while he was gone.
Mhm.
And I remember I was in therapy at the time and I went to my therapist and he looked at me and he's like, "What are you going to do over the weekend?" And I remember feeling completely scared. Like I didn't know what to do. Of course, I had all these like household things I could do and
Right.
grocery shopping and
Mm.
organizing, but I honestly didn't know what I would want to do with time alone. I had completely gone for the view that as a wife and mother, the more I sacrificed, the better I would be. And I think we get this from Mother's Day talks. We get this from some religious teachings that like sacrifice, 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 and the better you'll be. But I have found that I actually sacrificed deep relationships because I didn't have a self anymore. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't prioritize myself. And so I hurt my family because they didn't have a full me to bring to the relationship. And this, of course, bled into our sex life, that
Mhm.
I wasn't authentic. I wasn't living authentically. And like we talked about with vulnerability, like if you cannot bring authenticity and vulnerability in your life, into your sex life, it's going to be a shell. It's not going to have the potential because you're not able to bring a full like self who has shame and
Yep.
things that you're scared of. You bring
Mhm.
this self who's trying to appear perfect, who's trying to appear like you have everything together and like you're being the wife and mother that you thought you were supposed to be. And so I think that a lot of us as mothers fall into this where we give so much. And I think innately, I mean, I wish I could separate it. I think some of it's cultural. I think some of it might be how we're made as women, but you will actually do better in your life as a wife and a mother if you are able to find ways to feed your soul, whatever that looks like for you, to find a passion, find a hobby, find a way to keep learning and developing within what motherhood looks like for you, and you are going to be a gift not only to yourself but your family as well.
I have found the exact same thing to be true. I lost myself wifing and mothering as well, and it almost cost the dissolution of my marriage. It got
Yes.
bad.
Yes.
And so I
Yes.
know how important that is. And I've talked about that so much on my podcast. So I know that the ladies that are listening and men will relate. But can you tell us like why you feel like there's a new definition for sex? Why is there this need to shift this definition?
And if I could go back for 1 second, I just wanted to
Yeah.
add with the part about motherhood and losing
Mm,
yourself. There's actually a really interesting study
mm,
where, in research, when they ask about sexual fulfillment, women
mhm,
and men rate pretty similarly. But
mm.
one researcher went in and they were like, okay, well, I actually want to find out how they're rating their sexual satisfaction. And men, just like if you're thinking about it, they rated it how you would think. Like they rated it if they felt fulfilled, if they orgasmed, if it was a pleasurable experience. But women, on the other hand, were rating their sexual satisfaction based on if their partner looked or felt satisfied. And so I think this goes to the crux of not being authentic and being able to say, this is what I need and this is
Mhm.
what I want, because that's what a lot of us fall into when we're giving, giving, giving. We don't even know what we want. Is
Right,
in sex, you're looking to your spouse, you're like, well, I guess if he's fulfilled, I guess I should feel fulfilled too. Instead of
right.
recognizing that as a woman, you usually need different things. And this goes into your next question.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm. It does. It's perfect.
yeah. So the next question then is this change of the definition is growing up. If I were to ask you, like, if
Mhm.
you had sex last night, which I won't ask you, but if I were to ask you, right, I think most of us would think, oh, sex as penis in vagina. And if
Right.
that didn't happen, sex didn't occur. The problem with that definition of sex is that it's actually a reproductive definition. And
Mhm.
sex is so much more than intercourse. And when we define sex as intercourse, we actually leave out female pleasure because most women cannot orgasm from intercourse alone. And that's huge. I've talked to so many women
Yes.
and
Boom,
they're
right
like,
there.
yes. And they're like, wait, so I can't orgasm from intercourse. And I'm like, yeah, like you're
Right.
so normal. But we think of this definition and we think it's the way sex is supposed to be. And so we don't recognize that this is actually a reproductive definition, right? This is how people can potentially become pregnant. And that can be a great part of sex. I don't want to
Right.
take intercourse out. But for most women, intercourse alone is not going to be as pleasurable for them. And so when we focus on sex as intercourse, it leaves out women.
I love in Emily's book how what's her last name again? Do you remember it?
Nagoski.
Nagoski. Yeah, how she talks about how the clitoris is not there for any reason besides for women's pleasure. That's it. There's
Yes.
no other purpose to even have
Nope.
it.
Yeah.
And the clitoris is super important in being able for most women to be able to orgasm.
Yeah. It is like the
That's
most
to be
important part.
stimulated. It's it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
yet almost none of us can orgasm with penis and vagina sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is
And
so
only like,
freeing. Yes, only that. Like so
yeah.
freeing to know there's not something wrong with you once again if you're having problems in that way. If you're not able to orgasm with that kind of sex.
Yeah. And I think it's so empowering because, along with some of those misconceptions of men, we think of men as being more sexual. We think of them as having high desire, wanting sex all the time, being able to enjoy sex really easily.
Right.
But when we actually look at female anatomy, I think it's so empowering to women because just the tip of the clitoris, if I could show you a picture right now, I would. Like, the clitoris
Mhm,
isn't just the little tip you can see at kind of the
mhm,
top of your vulva by the
mhm,
pubic bone area.
mhm.
That's just the tip. But that little tip has almost twice as many nerve endings as the tip of the penis. And so, just if we look at our anatomy, women
Right.
are wired to
Mhm.
be, maybe I would even say, more sexual than men, and their
That is so
potential for
cool.
sexual pleasure is more. But we've been, these myths
Mhm.
of men being more sexual, we don't believe that. But sex is meant to be so pleasurable and fulfilling for women, and our anatomy shows that.
I love that. I love that. So tell me, how would you suggest that husbands can best support their wives in living up to their sexual potential? Like, what have you seen? What have you who in all of your studies and the women I'm sure that you've talked to, what have you found?
I think a huge part is for men to recognize that women's experience in sex is very different than theirs. For most men, they're able to orgasm through intercourse. And so the definition of sex serves them. It's easy. They're
Mhm.
able to reach orgasm. And they don't realize, just like a lot of us don't realize, that that's not what's pleasurable, most pleasurable for most women. That doesn't mean intercourse can't be a great pleasurable part, but that's not usually what helps women feel a lot of pleasure. So I think first is education to
Mhm.
recognize that. And I also think patience for them to learn. This is huge, that most women actually have to learn how to orgasm. And that's different than men. Most men don't have to be taught. It
Right.
comes naturally. And if intercourse occurs, they're going to be able to orgasm. But most women have to learn. And so this takes practice, this takes exploration. And so men being able to support their wife in that, whatever they decide that looks like in their marriage, whether they're exploring together, whether she maybe explores by herself a little bit to find what feels good and then brings it back, but giving them space and room. And then I think my third main thing I would say is that a lot of us feel like sex is sacred, which I think it is. I'm a believer in that.
Mhm.
But we go to the extreme that then we don't talk about it with anyone. But you can talk about your sex life without giving intimate details. And I want men to try to understand that women need to learn from women how to really love sex, because men have it pretty easy most times. Not always, but
Right.
most men, it's pretty
Right.
easy. And they don't know what women need. And women have been raised in a society where we're not even taught sex is going to be enjoyable. I mean, if you think about going into your first
Right.
sexual encounter, I just did a poll on Instagram, and like 95% of women expected pain on their
Right.
first time having intercourse. And so
Right.
that sets up women to expect pain. And best case scenario, they're happy they didn't have pain. They're not even expecting to have pleasure. And so recognizing that this is where we're coming from and allowing your wife to learn from women. Like, I hope my podcast and my course and all these things I've prepared, I really want to be there to help support women, but also talking with friends. And together you get to decide, like, wow, this is too personal. I don't want you sharing that. But I'd be totally fine if you ask about, like, hey, what have you realized helps bring up your desire? Or how have you learned to orgasm? I'm really struggling. And you don't have to give intimate details of what you and your spouse do together, but you can share helpful tips. And I think women really need women.
And I think your course is super helpful for that. Like I said, I'm about halfway through your course and it has so many really awesome gems and mind blowing concepts that I did not know. So, and I've read tons of books because I've been trying to help people with this for a long time, but you have information that I still had not heard.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you are doing awesome at the
Oh,
education
thank
in
you.
this. And I
Thank
think
you.
it's so important because no matter what, your sexual relationship filters into every area of your marriage,
Totally.
into everything. So when it's
Yes.
really bad, a lot of other things are really bad that could be easily fixed if that sexual part weren't such a big deal,
Yeah.
and cause, the cause of a lot of issues, I feel like.
Yeah.
So what do you think that women should understand about their potential for their sexual, I mean, we talked about this, but their sexual relationship with their spouse, what do you think women have not understood that they most need to understand? Like, what would be your takeaway?
I really think, well, first I want to say too, thank you so much. It's been so great to have you in the
I'm so thankful you came on. I love
no,
your course and I can't wait to finish it.
this has been so fun, but I want whoever is listening, women, men, to know that I have been where a lot of women are. And so I think that's one reason I did the courses, because I know the pain and the resentment and the struggle that it can come with not feeling fulfilled in sex. And so I wanted to help other women fix that because I found how to fix it myself. So I went back to school and I just realized in myself and my marriage how empowering sex can be. Like you said, it's not the only important part of a relationship, but when you aren't having a great sex life, it's going to bleed into other parts of your marriage. Just like if you're not emotionally connected, it's going to
Right.
bleed into other parts. They all feed off of each other. And I really wish women could understand that sex is for them, that sex is actually a place where they can be cared for. Innately, as women, so often we are giving. We're giving to our kids. We're giving our bodies in pregnancy and birth. Or if you haven't had kids, just in menstruating, like we are sacrificing our bodies. And sex, I believe, is actually a really beautiful place where we can be cared for. And that doesn't mean that we don't make sex good for our husband as well.
Right.
But I think that it's a place where we can be cared for, we can feel empowered. And when sex is good in your relationship, you feel empowered in the rest of your life. You feel like you have this safe space to show up completely authentically. There's no
Mhm.
other time in life you're as vulnerable as being sexually intimate with another person. Like that is, I think, the most vulnerable you can get. And when you have that part of your relationship, it's going to strengthen all the other parts, and you're going to be able to feel empowered and loved in a way that you've never felt before.
I have I think she's 60-year-old sister, and she just said, it's just kept getting better and better and
Yeah.
better for me. And I think for women, because of the education, and just like you said, we need patience, we need curiosity, we need practice,
Yeah.
that it can only go up from here for a lot of
Mhm.
us,
Yes. And as we get older, we start to shed some of those, like, I don't care what they
Right,
think of me. Take
exactly.
me as I am. And
Right.
that's a huge part.
Right. So I just appreciate so much you coming on. I love your message. I love your program so far, halfway through, and I cannot wait to finish it. And
Oh,
can you
thank
tell
you.
us just a little bit about how my audience can find you?
Yeah, if you just go to ladiestalkinglove.com, you can find all my things there. If you go to ladiestalkinglove.com/top 10, I have a freebie you can grab. That's the top 10 questions to ask your spouse about sex. That's a great place to start. You can find information about my course. And then I'm on Instagram at ladies.talkinglove, and email me at hello@ladiestalkinglove.com, hello@ladiestalkinglove.com. And I love hearing from people, and my podcast, Ladies Talking Love. So I
Oh,
love connecting, and I hope that you can feel empowered.
well, you have a wealth of information. You really do. I can tell you've taken so much time to figure
I
this
have.
out. And so we are also appreciative of you, and thank you so
Oh,
much
thank
for
you.
coming on.
Thank you so much.
All right. We will see you. Hopefully we can have you on another time. I would
Yeah,
love to see
I
you
would love
again.
that.
But in the meantime, I can't wait to finish your program.
Okay, thank you.
All
Yeah, keep
right.
me posted. Thanks so
Very
much.
well. Okay,
See
bye-bye.
ya. Bye.